Densities and opacities. For those of you who haven't really looked into this yet, this is a really great opportunity to learn. I'm just starting to, even though I've got a background in art and arts education. My specialism was never painting. I always concentrated on using film or photography. So it's really interesting to learn about this, and it's made my painting so much better. So it's really worth putting in a little bit of time now and again to research what's going on with your paints. I use lots of different paints. Artist grade paints like Liquitex or Daler Rowney, Winsor & Newton, and the big brands that you'll find in art stores, rather than craft paints like Deco Art, will generally, but not always, contain information about opacity and transparency. They also have a permanency rating. This is some dioxazine purple from Liquitex Basics. You can see here that there is a small square, and this square is filled in. Now, don't think about these squares as white or black, because this is printed in white, but if this label were white, or if the tube were white, this mark would be in black. So think about it as an empty square, a full square, or a half full square. So let me show you what I mean. This is a full square, so that means this paint is opaque. This is another purple. It actually comes out even darker than the dioxazine purple. This is deep violet from Aquila's water-based resin alkyl colours series from Kusakabe. And this is a transparent colour. So you can see the square is empty. There is an outline to the square. The stars are to do with the permanence of the pigment. What you'll find is that traditional colours will tend to have higher star ratings because they've been tried and tested and known to last longer. Neons and fluorescents will especially degrade when exposed to UV light, so you need to consider that if you're going to hang a work in a sunny place. These paints are both by Liquitex. This one's a regular acrylic and this one's Basics. This tube is bigger, this tube is smaller. But this one is cheaper, and the reason why it's cheaper is because there's less pigment in here. And this one has got a higher quality and a higher density of pigment load. This may affect how much your paint sinks or rises in the cup. Now, this paint doesn't have the star rating. They've used this much more complex system here. This says in Japanese handomi, which means half transparent. So it's semi-transparent. And it says the hue and some other information here. If I wanted to find out information about this paint, I could easily Google it and find out the information in English. So that's one advantage to using bigger name brands. These are fluorescent paints from Amsterdam, and this is another kind of acrylic gouache that I use. I use acrylic gouaches quite often. There's lots of colours available in them. They seem to blend completely fine with other acrylic paints. They use an acrylic binder, but their pigment load is slightly different. These paints seem to be opaque as standard. They don't have any permanency or transparency information on any of their tubes. So I would assume that they are opaque as standard, and do a swatch test if you need to find out more information about those. This processed magenta is from Daler Rowney System 3. This was bought for me in Malaysia. This has a full square, filled in square, which means it's opaque. Some paints, even though they're made by art brands like this Daler Rowney System 3 acrylic, which was bought for me in Malaysia, it's got the name of the paint and the number. It has a permanency rating here, but it doesn't have any opacity information for me. So I would have to go online and check out this number of paint and find that information online. Usually it's fairly easy to do so. Where you start to run into problems is when you're using value brands like this, brands like Phoenix, that I haven't seen any real information about in English. It's hard to even find out what colours they offer, much less any information about the density or permanence or the opacity of their paints. There is no information on this label at all about the permanency or the opacity of this paint. So I'd have to do a swatch test if I wanted to find out, and then finding out the density of the paint would be even harder. But if I inform myself about other paints and do a quick swatch test, I should be able to come up with an educated guess. These are very, very cheap. I have to consider the cost of paints as well. Craft paints like those in this kind of bottle from Deco Art or Americano or Folk Art, other similar brands, will not have an opacity rating. They're not made for making works of art. We've got no information about their permanence or how paints by art brands and these kinds of paints react with each other. We don't really even have information about how brands like Liquitex will react with brands like De La Rowney, both of which are very established art brands. If you'd like to make work with craft paint, then you should just go ahead. There's nothing stopping you. It's very difficult to find out about the archival qualities of acrylics in general. There have been big issues with works from the 60s and 70s degrading. Like if you look into what's happened to some of Hockney's earlier acrylic paintings, there have been really big problems with permanency there and yellowing or the paint cracking over time. Things like humidity, UV light and lots of other factors will affect your paintings. And so will Floetrol. Floetrol is not designed to be used as an art medium, and nobody's got any ideas about its longevity. If you're interested in finding out about this argument about archival qualities, which comes up a lot on pouring forums on social media, then I suggest looking at the Tate's research about it, because the Tate have done a conservation article about issues with acrylic paints. And if you look up archival qualities conservation acrylic paints on Google, you'll find lots and lots of articles explaining that we just haven't used them long enough to really be able to say much about their archival qualities, much less use them with the kind of additives that pour artists are putting into them. Another question I had when I started doing acrylic pouring was, why is everybody using titanium white? Why aren't they using zinc whites? These are the same brands. They're both white. I didn't understand the difference, and I'm starting to a little bit more. It is to do with the opacity and the density of the paints. Titanium white seems to be very heavy. Zinc white seems to be the heaviest of all paints. If you look at the specific gravity, that's the term, specific gravity of art pigments, you'll be able to find lists. I'll try and link some below. So if you have a teaspoon of vermilion pigment and a teaspoon of zinc white pigment, the zinc white pigment will weigh more milligrams than the vermilion. This affects how the paints sink and rise in your pour cup. Understanding even the basics about this information helps you to work out what layer to put your paints in the cup. For example, you will want colours that are transparent to go in near the beginning and not to layer in opaques at the top of your cup, because when you pour it out, if your final layer of paint that hits the surface, the top layer is opaque, it will obscure everything underneath. This means if I want to put a gold base down, which I might do today, and put some dark purple over the top of it, I've got two shades here. One of them, the Prism Violets, is transparent, and the Dioxazine Purple is opaque. So that's going to make a big difference as to which order I want to put them in. If I want the Dioxazine Purple, I should put it in the background, meaning I should layer it into my cup as one of the last layers. If I want the Prism Violet floating on top of the other colours and you being able to see, for example, a hot pink or a green or a red through it, then I want to put that colour in first. So this is going to help you to not anticipate what your final cells or pour will look like, but it should help you to work out how are the layers of colour going to interact with each other to a certain extent. The links where I talk about the specific gravity of pigment and also the archival qualities of acrylic paint are below. I'm also going to link to some information on Liquitex basics, transparency and opacity, because that's one of the most commonly used brands in acrylic pouring. I'm sorry that this introduction was so long. I'll probably upload it as a separate video. Now I've got into it, I've realised that there's an awful lot to talk about, but it is worth learning. I hope that you found this video informative and that you join in on our challenge. If you upload your work, please leave a comment below so that I can see it. I'll be searching for the hashtag 30 days 30 pours throughout April to make sure that I can see your work if you tag it on social media. Thank you so much for watching. Please remember to give this video a thumbs up if you found it informative or educational. Bye.